Most people think that when a life completely falls apart, like when someone blows up their career or their marriage or just their entire reputation, that it happens because they got swept away by some, I don't know, uncontrollable emotion.
Right, like passion just kind of overpowered their reason.
Exactly. We assume they just lost their grip.
Yeah.
But welcome to this deep dive, by the way. Today we're taking you into a fascinating new analysis of the psychological thriller Obsession. And it argues the exact opposite of that assumption.
It really does. The script we're looking at is called The Price of Control, an analysis of obsession. And it suggests that total destruction doesn't actually happen because someone loses their grip.
Yeah.
It happens because they are utterly, deeply terrified of losing control.
It's just such a wild concept.
Yeah.
So our mission for our time together today is to really map out the anatomy of ruin. We want to show you how a seemingly perfect, meticulously constructed life can be completely dismantled from the inside out by just a single quiet pivot.
And that framing completely flips our standard understanding of human tragedy, doesn't it? Because we naturally want to believe that ruin requires a wrecking ball.
Oh, absolutely.
It's deeply comforting, to think that the destruction of a life has to be as loud and obvious and external as a hurricane or a sudden economic collapse.
Because if it's loud and external, we can see it coming. But the author of this analysis, they just strip away all that cinematic glamour right from the opening pages.
They do. They strip away the typical romantic tropes immediately. Because when we categorize these types of stories as, a love gone wrong or a fatal attraction, we're actually giving the protagonist way too much grace.
We're basically blaming the overwhelming mystical nature of love for their terrible decisions.
Exactly. But the text demands that we look at the mechanics of the psychology instead. It establishes a very cold, clinical, foundational premise. This isn't a story of affection. It is a calculated, deeply toxic grasp for power.
And I am so glad the text refuses to let the protagonist off the hook with that whole swept away by love excuse. Because, when you look at where the narrative actually begins, the guy isn't a victim of circumstance.
Not at all.
The analysis describes a man who has achieved what it calls a perfect life on the outside. Like he has checked every single societal box, the career, the aesthetic, the social standing.
Right.
But the text really highlights that underneath this flawless exterior is a dangerous, gaping emptiness.
And that juxtaposition, the external perfection against the internal void, that's the crucial starting point here. What the source points out is that this emptiness isn't just a passive state of sadness or melancholy.
It's not just him feeling a bit down.
Right. It operates as an active vulnerability. It's a hunger.
I was actually trying to visualize how that functions in a person's day-to-day life, you know? And it feels like, okay, imagine looking at a beautifully painted house that has been built directly over a sinkhole.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Like, the landscaping is absolutely pristine. The windows are shining, the picket fence is freshly painted, and from the street, it literally looks like a magazine cover.
But the foundation isn't resting on bedrock.
Exactly. It's sitting on nothing but a subterranean void. The house looks flawless, but because of that internal emptiness, the entire structure is literally just waiting to cave in.
That is a highly accurate way to look at the structural integrity of his psychology, actually. Because the sheer energy required to maintain that flawless exterior makes the internal sinkhole significantly more dangerous.
Wait, how so? Why does it make it worse?
Well, when a person is spending all their mental and emotional bandwidth polishing the windows of that house, maintaining the facade of perfection for everyone else, they have absolutely no resources left to actually address the void underneath.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They cannot acknowledge the sinkhole without admitting the house is flawed.
And nature abhors a vacuum, which leads directly to the catalyst of the entire film. The analysis zeroes in on what it terms the first spark.
Right, that unexpected encounter the protagonist has.
Yeah, and the text describes this initial moment as feeling completely harmless. It's just a sudden rush of excitement. But then the analysis drops the hammer and defines this encounter not as a meet-cute, but as a psychological trap.
And it is a trap precisely because of the vacuum you just mentioned.
See, I'm struggling with the word trap, though. I spent a lot of time wrestling with this section of the notes. Because if he is so completely empty and walled off, wouldn't he just be numb to a random encounter?
You would think so, yes.
Right. I just have a hard time buying that the universe just laid out a snare and he accidentally stepped in it. Does his internal emptiness actually cause him to build the trap himself?
That's a really perceptive question.
Because it feels less like a spark landing on dry leaves and more like he was actively soaking the floorboards of that house in gasoline.
Well, the psychology of projection explained exactly how that mechanism works. The analysis makes it very clear that the event itself, the encounter, is entirely neutral.
Okay, so the universe didn't orchestrate a downfall.
No, not at all. But when a person is living with that profound, unacknowledged internal emptiness, they become desperate for anything that registers as high contrast emotion. They desperately need to feel something that proves they're still alive.
And adrenaline does that.
Exactly. Adrenaline is a very potent mimic. When he experiences the thrill of this encounter, he misinterprets that dangerous spiking adrenaline for the missing substance in his life.
Oh, man. So he thinks the adrenaline is the structural support he's been missing.
Right. He looks at this rush and assumes it's the cure to his emptiness. So the trap is self-constructed because he projects his own desperate need for meaning onto what is essentially just a fleeting thrill.
So he believes this secret excitement will finally fill the void. But in reality, it's simply the trigger mechanism that's going to collapse the entire sinkhole.
Precisely. The illusion that adrenaline equals meaning is a terrifying psychological blind spot.
It really is. And because he's entirely driven by this desperate attempt to patch the void, the narrative just shifts gears completely. We move completely out of the realm of a harmless encounter, and we cross the threshold into an active, highly dangerous pursuit.
The text explicitly charts how curiosity mutates into obsession.
Mutates. Yeah.
Mutates is the precise terminology used in the analysis, and it's vital to distinguish between the two. Because, curiosity is a natural human impulse.
Sure, you see something interesting, you look at it.
Right, it's a fleeting interest that you can observe and just let go of. But obsession is fundamentally different. It's a consuming cognitive loop, it demands constant feeding, and it actually begins to rewrite a person's priorities to ensure its own survival.
And the analysis highlights a specific detail in this transition that, well, it completely stopped me in my tracks.
Which part?
It points out that the protagonist doesn't even try to control the obsession. Like, there is no internal struggle where he wrestles with his conscience. He doesn't try to fight it off or seek help or anything.
He just immediately starts lying.
Yes. He just starts hiding his movements, fabricating stories, and risking his meticulously constructed life. And the text really emphasizes that he knows what he's doing is wrong.
His moral compass isn't broken.
Exactly. He sees the stakes, and he actively chooses this path anyway.
And this is the specific narrative pivot that separates a story about a tragic, compounding mistake from a story about true psychological horror. The awareness is what makes it chilling.
But let me push back on that a little bit, because I am having a really hard time accepting the conscious nature of this descent. I mean, the analysis claims he actively chooses total destruction, but does anyone actually wake up and choose to obliterate their life?
That's hard to fathom, I know.
I just keep thinking about the typical way we view affairs or dark secrets. It's usually framed like losing control of a car on an icy road. You hit a patch of black ice, the car spins out, you panic, and you crash.
Tragic accident.
Right. It's devastating, but it is fundamentally an accident. You were trying to stay on the road.
Yeah.
But this analysis seems to be arguing something entirely different. It's arguing that he is actively steering into the wall. Why would anyone consciously choose to hit the gas toward a cliff?
Well, to understand that, we have to look really closely at what the concept of control actually provides to someone who is fundamentally empty. You're looking at the final crash and asking why he chose it.
Yeah.
But he isn't choosing the crash. He's choosing the sensation of steering. Let's look at the difference between love and control for a second. Genuine love, real connection. It requires massive vulnerability.
Oh, sure.
It requires yielding control, opening yourself up to the possibility of being hurt, and allowing another human being to profoundly affect your internal state.
Which, for a guy whose entire existence relies on a perfect, controlled facade, would be completely terrifying.
It would feel like an existential threat. For someone hiding a void, vulnerability is psychological death. So he cannot pursue genuine love. Instead, he substitutes it with control.
So the secret itself is a form of control.
Exactly. The text argues that the need to exert dominance over a secret, to be the sole architect of a hidden world, becomes profoundly addictive. It provides this synthetic, highly concentrated sense of power.
So it's the asymmetric information that gets him high.
Yeah.
Like when he is sitting across the dinner table lying to his family, he knows the truth and they don't. He holds all the cards.
Precisely. In those moments of deception, he feels like the absolute master of his universe. The lying isn't a messy byproduct of the affair that he just has to deal with. The lying is the actual drug.
Wait, really? The lying itself?
Yes. The deception feeds his ego and creates a false sense of superiority. That rush of hidden power is far more intoxicating to him and exponentially more destructive than genuine vulnerable connection could ever be.
Wow. That reframes the entire middle act of the script. It's not a romance hiding in the shadows. It is a power trip. He is choosing the rush of the secret power over his own morality.
He is.
He sees the needle on his internal dashboard pointing to wrong, and he consciously overrides the warning system because the high of feeling powerful finally numbs the emptiness.
And that conscious override is what makes the mutation from simple curiosity to full-blown obsession so absolute. He basically trades his moral agency for the illusion of control.
But the physics of deception guarantee that you cannot maintain that illusion forever, right? I mean, eventually gravity kicks in.
It always does.
Which brings us to the third phase of the analysis,
Yeah.
the inevitable collapse. The consequence of this conscious choice to trade reality for secret power is that the lies inevitably gain mass. They just become physically and psychologically too heavy to hold up.
Because they require an immense amount of structural integrity from a foundation that we've already established is completely hollow.
Exactly. And the analysis goes into detail about how this unraveling process actually happens. And what's fascinating is it doesn't feature a sudden, dramatic explosion where someone bursts into a room and catches him.
No, it's much slower.
Yeah. It describes small cracks beginning to show in his daily life. The people around him just start to notice that things are slightly off. What do those cracks actually look like from a psychological perspective? Like, how does the facade start to fracture before it actually falls?
Well, the cracks manifest through cognitive overload. When you're maintaining a massive lie, your brain has to constantly manage two conflicting realities.
Oh, that sounds exhausting.
It is. You have to remember the truth of what you did, and you have to remember the exact architecture of the fiction you created to hide it. You have to track who knows what, which version of the timeline you gave to which person, and where you were supposed to be at any given moment.
So it takes up a lot of space.
It requires an exorbitant amount of mental RAM.
So the cracks aren't necessarily him leaving a piece of hard evidence on the counter. The cracks are like a slight hesitation before answering a really simple question about his day.
Right.
Or a sudden flash of unjustified anger when someone alters his schedule. It's just the sheer exhaustion of keeping all the plates spinning.
Exactly. The cognitive dissonance physically and mentally breaks a person down. The facade begins to slip because he simply lacks the energy to paint over the sinkhole anymore.
Because all his energy is going toward the lie.
Yes. The people close to him might not know exactly what the secret is, but they can clearly see the strain of him holding the beach ball underwater, so to speak. They feel the tension.
And once those cracks appear, the water just starts rushing in. The analysis walks through the climax of the film, noting that eventually the cognitive load becomes impossible to maintain and there is no more hiding.
The truth breaks the surface.
It does. And the brutal irony that the text points out here is the specific nature of his punishment. The final result is a complete, absolute loss of the very control he was so obsessively trying to capture.
It is the ultimate paradox of an obsession rooted in power. You grasp so violently to control one singular secret aspect of your existence that you completely lose your grip on everything else.
And the source is very firm on the finality of this consequence. It emphasizes that the consequences are absolute. Like, he doesn't just face a temporary setback.
Yeah.
He doesn't get to apologize, do some damage control, and then just rebuild his reputation over time. The text states plainly that he loses everything. It is total devastation.
And the author notes that the reason this climax is so terrifying for an audience to watch is because it doesn't feel like heightened movie magic.
Right, it feels relentlessly real.
The analysis literally says it feels like this could happen to anyone.
Which brings us to the core thesis of the entire essay. The text uses a very specific word in its closing arguments, and that word is price. It focuses on the price that an obsession demands.
Yes. We often have this deeply flawed cognitive bias where we view our secrets or our minor transgressions as free.
But they don't cost us anything.
Exactly. We think that if no one finds out, we're just getting away with something. We view the hidden thrill as a victimless bonus to our lives.
A free lunch.
But the pursuit of control through deception actually operates much more like a predatory loan shark. It offers a very quick, very intoxicating infusion of power up front when you're feeling empty.
But the interest.
Exactly. The interest on that loan compounds exponentially in the dark.
Man, that's dark. So every lie is basically a new line of credit you take out just to pay off the interest on the previous lie. And eventually the math catches up and the debt gets called in.
And when the dead is finally called in, it strips the protagonist of all agency. That is the true, devastating tragedy outlined in the script. He started this entire dangerous process trying to assert his own agency, trying to feel alive, trying to be the absolute master of his hidden life.
But by indulging the obsession, he became entirely enslaved by it.
The obsession didn't just ruin his perfect life, it consumed his life. It demanded everything he had to give until there was literally nothing left but the consequences.
There's actually a phrase from the analysis that really drills into that concept. It says, no more control, just consequences.
That's a powerful line.
That is the exact moment the bill arrives on the table and you realize your wallet is completely empty. The illusion of power just shatters the second it is exposed to the light.
Because he spent all his available capital simply trying to maintain a lie. When we step back and look at the synthesis of this entire character arc, the source really provides a masterclass in the quiet, insidious danger of a hollow life.
It really does.
It demonstrates how an internal, unaddressed void can take a harmless, everyday encounter and turn it into an inescapable psychological trap.
Because the encounter itself is just a spark. The danger lies in what the spark lands on. If a spark lands on solid, healthy ground, it just burns out and disappears.
Right.
But if it lands at a void, if it lands on a pile of gasoline-soaked insecurities, it immediately takes root and burns the whole house down.
And from there, the text forces us to recognize the chilling distinction between genuine love and the toxic desire for control. Love builds a shared reality. Control isolates you inside a fabricated one.
And ultimately, the narrative proves the terrifying reality that consciously indulging an obsession will demand the price of everything you hold dear. It is an incredibly heavy set of takeaways, but it's deeply vital to unpack. Because for you, listening to this deep dive right now, the reason this matters isn't just so you can sound smart analyzing a dark movie at a dinner party.
Definitely not.
The source material we covered today really serves as a mirror. It shows us how small, seemingly isolated choices, when they're fueled by the wrong internal motivations, when they're driven by a desperate need to mask our own emptiness, how they can cascade into total, unrecoverable destruction.
It reminds us that ruin is rarely a sudden external event. Ruin is a methodical process. It's a series of small, quiet, conscious choices to prioritize a dangerous thrill over a stable reality.
It forces every single one of us to examine our own foundations. Are we actually building our lives on solid ground, or are we just beautifully painting the facade, planting the flowers, and completely ignoring the massive sinkhole forming underneath the floorboards?
Because if the foundation is weak, you're constantly at the mercy of a random spark.
Which leaves us with the final thought I want you to really mull over. The analytical text explicitly warns that this devastating cycle can happen to anyone, specifically because it preys on an internal emptiness that every human being experiences at some point in their life. Nobody is perfectly whole all the time.
We all have our cracks.
So if the true insidious danger of obsession is that it brilliantly disguises itself as the exact thing we are convinced we are missing, how often do we overlook the small cracks in our own lives simply because the thrill makes us feel like we are finally in control? If you are standing in a beautifully painted house but you feel the floorboards starting to tilt, maybe it is time to stop admiring the paint and start looking at the